Adam Engst talks Elon Musk, Twitter, and new iPads at the Apple CIDER user group. This is MacVoices. Today's edition of MacVoices is supported by RocketMoney. Take full control of your subscriptions with RocketMoney at rocketmoney.com/MacVoices. So, Adam, would you like a formal introduction, or do we just want to jump in?
Does anyone here not know who I am? I mean, this is not an ego thing, but if you don't know, well, Chuck will tell you. And if I were, I'll tell you, but just to terror.
Well, I was going to introduce you as the next senator from the state of New York. After your successful Senate seat bid.
I have not actually checked the election results recently. What happened? Did I get elected something I didn't know about?
Yeah, there was this huge write-in campaign, Adam, for you that nobody told you about. Oh,
and you won. You won with 3 votes.
Which random celebrity who knows nothing about anything did I beat? Just to be clear.
How about the football player that doesn't know what Robert's Rules of Order is?
Yep. We won't name it.
Playing football, you just listen to the quarterback, man.
Yeah.
So, okay.
we better stick to tech, I think. So, Adam, do you want to start with something easy, or do you want me to throw you a curveball?
We're talking football.
Whatever you want to do.
It's not. I don't know. It's baseball season. Go for it, Chuck.
Okay, so then I just have one word for you: Twitter.
Oh, okay. Oh man. There's a lot of it. There's a whole lot of nuts.
Right over the edge.
Oh man. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So okay. Show of hands, how many people have been following the Twitter soap opera? Okay. Most people, but not everyone. Okay. So wow, yeah, this is kind of nuts. So everyone knows who Elon Musk is. He's the guy who owns Tesla, SpaceX, the Boring Company, et cetera, certified nutso. But until fairly recently, I always thought that he was certifiably crazy in kind of a good way, because he did crazy things, but he also pushed stuff forward in ways that people who were more sensible wouldn't. So that was kind of interesting. And then when was it? Sometime this spring, I think, he decides that he wants to buy Twitter. And he's going to pay $54.20 per share for Twitter, which is $44 million or something like that. And the reason for $54.20 is because 420 is a pot joke. And so this whole thing from the very beginning doesn't sound real. There's this wonderful writer for Bloomberg named Matt Levine, who he writes incredibly smart stuff about high finance. I know very little about high finance, so I was reading his stuff, going, "Wow, I never knew. That's so great." He wrote about Musk over and over again, and all the ins and outs of the deal and whatnot. And then because no one could believe this was real, right? This didn't make any sense at all. And then Musk tries to get out of it. And then he does, but then he backs out. It's like, no, I'm not going to do it. Twitter has too many bots, even though one of the claims that he had made was that he was buying Twitter because he wanted to clean up the bot problem. So this all seems like a big idea for him to get out of this $44 billion deal. But of course, he's gotten too far in, so it's going to cost him $1 billion to get out of the deal. And hours before this case, because Twitter immediately sues him. So the hours before this case goes to the judge, Musk does an about face and says, "Yes, I am going to buy Twitter for $44 billion." And the deal actually goes through. And he promptly fires everyone, all of the adults in charge. And then he promptly fires half of the staff. And this is all happening a week or so ago. Today, the big deal was there was something to do with blue verified check marks, which people are going to have to pay $7.99 per month to have. But there were going to be gray official verified check marks for, like, I don't know, government accounts or something like that. And those lasted for what, Chuck? About 5 hours before Twitter did another about face. I mean, this is like corporate management through Ouija boards. So, like, I can't even begin to explain what's happening. The closest I can come to a summary is that Elon Musk really liked Twitter, and he really liked being able to say random crazy stuff on Twitter. And he figured that maybe if he bought Twitter, he'd be able to say more random crazy stuff and make it more the way, even more like the way he wanted. But it never made the whole thing never made any sense at all. Twitter itself as a business doesn't make a ton of sense. And he's in a world of hurt now because although he was the world's richest man, that was really on paper because of his stock holdings in Tesla and whatnot. And he sold a bunch of that to pay for it in part, but a whole lot of it was financed. Like $13 billion or more was financed by major investment banks. And so Twitter actually has to pay something like $1 billion a year in interest just to do that. Problem is, Twitter doesn't make $1 billion a year. So this whole thing is as like crazy making from like in every imaginable way. So, there are people who are Elon Musk fans who believe he's somehow going to figure it out and it's all going to work out. The other possibility is the whole thing's going to implode. like
WeWork.
Yeah, like WeWork, or who knows? I mean, it is literally, I mean, at this point, maybe Twitter is sufficiently valuable that someone like Facebook, I don't know, would buy it if it totally imploded. But I don't know, like, it's not a public company anymore. It's a private company. So it could literally just go away if Musk loses interest or there's simply no way to pay for it. So yeah, that's my take on the craziest thing that is happening in the world of tech right now. I mean, there is no question that I don't have any answers. I don't think anyone else has any answers either, including Elon Musk. So,
did you
have anything? Yeah, do you have any more on that, Chuck? Was there something else you were hoping to get me to say about that?
No. I mean, how about a show of hands here? How many of us? Yeah, us are on Twitter now.
On or use?
Oh, well, okay, fair point, but I'll say on for the moment.
Okay.
Okay,
so on, I have an account.
Surprisingly, not a lot. Is there anybody that has left Twitter because of all the controversy here? Okay, that's good. So, Adam, I guess the one thing that came up in a discussion I was having last night, do you think Twitter will be around in 6 months to a year? I mean, do you think it will remain relevant enough to
6 months to a year feels pretty short. I have a hard time seeing it imploding that fast. And it's got a lot of users. So I think we have somewhat moved past the time of and the world when like MySpace and Friendster and those kinds of social networks could really go away. And I guess MySpace actually still exists technically. So I don't think it's likely to do that, to go away completely that way. It may become a whole lot less relevant, although there are a lot of people there's a lot of people who really like Twitter. I personally think it's a cesspit, and I don't use it. So that's why I said it's different. Well, I guess I have an account, but I refuse to go on it and use it anymore. And I think it feels like it's an important conduit for a lot of people who want to say things without somehow quite, I don't know what the right word is, like, you can put something out on Twitter without issuing a press release. So like politicians are constantly, saying what their platforms are on Twitter now because it's stupid easy to do, and lots of people will read it, and then it's showing up in newspapers, and and the actual media is now reporting on Twitter as a source because it's direct from whoever's actually saying it. But that part of it feels to me like it's a little too embedded in the world to go away. And I have a hard time seeing anything changing. You don't see that happening with Facebook, for instance. Like you'll see news stories that talk about like what a group posted on Facebook, like a school will post something on Facebook and that will get put into a news story. But very seldom do people like make pronouncements on, announcements on Facebook and have them show up as kind of news items. So that's kind of the role that I feel Twitter plays that I don't see anything else taking over immediately. And so it may be, and people may just say, "Oh, too crazy. I'm not going to do this anymore." And then we will not have that, which I don't think would be a bad thing. And people need to shoot their mouths off a whole lot less.
Interesting that you would choose that characteristic, because the thing that I don't see other social media platforms have is the same kind of immediacy. That, and not just that, the fact that anybody can post whatever they want to say, but just the fact that it's being said so immediately. And maybe it's because of the way Facebook handles things. And, I see posts from friends that were 3 days old, and it's like, gee, it would have been really nice to know about that, 3 days ago. And with Twitter, it's like, it's always what's going on right now is at the top of your feed, whether it's you use the public feeds or whether you have your own. So that's something that I think is, to your point, I think that's so important in the world right now. And I don't know who else is going to do it quite the same way.
And I should say, I think it's important, but I don't think it's good. I'm not a fan of this. I'm not a fan of Twitter. I'm not a fan of social media in general. I think it's a whole lot of nonsense for the most part that is not improving social discourse or civil society in any way, shape, or form. So that's, that said, it's going to be hard to put that genie back in the bottle. Probably impossible to put that genie back in the bottle. So, I'm willing to acknowledge that I'm probably on the losing end of history here in this one. But again, the world does not need to know what every freaking person wants to say at every moment. And my take on a lot of this stuff is that we need more small groups, that humans work. There's something called Dunbar's number. It's 150. And basically that's kind of the number that people can deal with in terms of how many people you know and interact with on a regular basis. It's the reason why, villages used to be in roughly that size. It's the reason why military units, take that, and then there's certain other smaller numbers that come along with it. Humans don't scale well. And so my personal feeling is that a great amount of this kind of chatter is totally fine within a group. Like, you all can talk about Mac stuff, and that's great. But that doesn't mean that every Mac user in the world needs to be in that discussion. And so that's kind of, I think it's important to have these discussions within the context of a group that is of a human manageable scale. And Twitter and Facebook don't do that. So that's one of the reasons why I dislike them intensely. So any of that.
Yeah, it's just, I almost feel like any tech gathering right now has to at least talk a little bit about Twitter and where this is going, where it is and where it's going, because it's hard. It's like a train wreck. It's hard to look away.
I will admit I'm seeing a whole lot of stuff popping up on Mastodon. I don't use Mastodon particularly either, but Mastodon, I have a Mastodon account, which I signed up for however many years ago. And so now I'm getting people who are following me on Mastodon, and, it's where I'm seeing people talk about it. And I will have to go and figure out Mastodon to the extent of that, and see if it solves a lot of the problems. I mean, one of the other things that, sort of like in terms of the scaling that I was talking about, like a great deal of the problems with social media could be related or could be solved by simply saying that, like, you don't need to have anyone who can share things to more than 1,000 people, or some again, manageable number. That a great deal of the problems with social media come with the fact that one person can suddenly spew all sorts of whatever to millions of people. And then those millions of people can reshare it to tens of thousands each. And so information travels very quickly without any regard for whether it's useful or in any ways correct.
And because there's now so much, because there's now so much of those messages flying around, people assume it must be true because a million people said it. No, one guy said it, and it got copied everywhere.
Yeah, and then we so much of this is happening that it calls into question the veracity of everything. Pardon me for a little bit of soapbox here, but I mean, this is what I do. I'm a publisher. I spend my entire life getting it right. Like when I write something, it is correct. And I try and do that. And I make mistakes occasionally. And when I do, I correct them, like in public, because that's important. And so this way the world has moved to being able to say anything you want, which has no bearing on reality, much less being a true fact. It just screws with my head, like that's just not okay. And so, from the perspective of a tech publisher where you can look it up, when I say, the ninth generation iPad costs $329 and supports the Apple Pencil, the first generation Apple Pencil, that's correct. Those are actual facts. I am not making it up. And, that's so much of, people can say anything else on these sites and then that information gets out there and crowds out everything that's real. So, yeah, sorry, soapbox. I can't resist this sort of stuff because it just really, really bugs me that, fact and truth and veracity have no, I won't say have no value, but they have been suffering significantly in the last, 5 to 10 years. And social media has a great deal to do with that. So yeah, not a fan.
Yeah. I knew I could wind you up on that.
Yeah, that's right.
But at the same time, your point about being a publisher, that is a perspective that I don't think I've heard anyone else take or explain exactly that way. It's not that what you said was no surprise, but the fact that you are obviously personally offended and maybe professionally threatened by the fact that it's a challenge for you to exist in that world is a whole different animal.
I mean, if you look at the really reputable publishing companies out there, they employ an entire class of person called a fact checker. So a real publication, like magazine, the real magazines, the real newspapers, when someone writes an article, there's someone else in that organization who calls the sources and verifies the facts. I mean, that's what, because that was thought to be important.
I remember the old TV show Monk with Tony Shalhoub, where he was such a nitpicker about everything. He tried to get a job at a magazine, and while he was waiting for his interview, he picked up the current issue in the magazine. And in the interview, he lists off these 30 things that were wrong. And the person from the magazine doing the interview said, all that was wrong in the first issue, and he said, no, on the first page. He didn't get the job.
But seriously, I mean that it's sort of one of those things where obviously, I come from an era when so Tidbit started in 1990. Tanya and I were very recently out of college, and we were attempting, we were attempting to seem as professional as we could. Back in the day, that's what you did when you were on the internet. People didn't know that you were, two kids basically just out of college doing this. And so you felt like you had to do everything you could to make yourself look professional. And that meant getting your facts right, making sure everything was really well edited, et cetera, et cetera. And it was fascinating how that's changed over the years. I mean, another thing, for instance, is, you work at home. You didn't let on that you worked at home when you talked on the phone. So even much later, when we had our son was born and he's an infant, we were super careful that there was never the sound of a kid crying in the background. because that wasn't professional. But this is something that has, we've watched it change over the last 20 years, where now totally fine to be unprofessional. That's more real. And
your pet is supposed to join the Zoom
maybe
meeting.
it's more real, but I do think that there's still a role to be played for what professional means, that it means you're going that extra step to get your facts right, to seem as though you are at a high level, rather than you're just kind of winging it and make it up as you go. So again, I feel like I have dated myself tremendously with this, but looking around, I think you guys are in at least my generation, so we're good.
Yeah, there's a new social network, or I guess it's relatively new, called Be Real, and if you sign up for it,
hang on a second here, Chuck. I've lost volume.
Oh, you have me, Adam? Okay, testing 1, 2, 3.
We're hearing you.
All right. Well, while Adam's working out his problems, there's a new social network called Be Real, and once a day you'll get a reminder or a notification from Be Real to take like a minute-long video of yourself and whatever you're doing right at that moment. And it's supposed to be authentic. It's supposed to be obviously real, and it is probably the most boring thing you've ever seen, because I love you guys, but I don't really care what you're doing at that moment, whether it's 10 in the morning or 10 at night. I seriously doubt that you're doing anything that exciting that commands my time. And yet there's this push toward, as Adam said, authenticity. Authenticity for what purpose?
And there's already been criticism and problems with it. People are doing it at work, and suddenly their work secrets on the computer screen behind them are getting published to the internet.
Pardon my interruption into this, but isn't that actually how Twitter started? The idea was that you were supposed to share something you were doing, and it was sort of a personal thing, and possibly with friends and so on, but before it became a public megaphone,
Yeah, I mean, the big thing with Twitter that was kind of interesting early on was the limit in terms of how much you could say. So it was the 140 characters,
right?
And the idea that that was very simple to do. And in the very early days of Twitter, Chuck was there too, like in the Mac world. When we all got on, I can't remember what the year was exactly, and it was interesting for a year or so, because people would share what they were doing in these very tiny little bites, and you got a little bit of insight into people's lives, and then you discover that people's lives are kind of the same all the time. Like once you've shared once, you really didn't need to do it again, because you're going to be doing the same thing every day or every week or whatever. And so I think a lot of that kind of fell by the wayside. Where Twitter really moved, in the last, again, decade or so, was more in the news. That Twitter feels more like where the news is, and that was, that seems to have been their focus. It's an interesting question, because obviously you can also just go to any news site and get exactly the same stuff. I mean, Twitter's not really innovating in any way. It's sort of aggregating and spreading. So, any event, let's talk about Apple stuff. I'm bored with Twitter. I've been bored with Twitter for years.
Well, sure. It sure didn't seem like it, Adam, but let's move to Apple stuff.
I have to admit, the soap opera was amusing to watch, but after that, okay.
Yeah. Okay, so how about another one word? iPad. We have a new crop of iPads, and
there's a lot of them.
There seems to be a lot of them. There are price points for everything. There's a bit, you referenced it a little bit earlier about some confusion over the Apple Pencil, and which iPads support which pencil. What is the state of the iPad at this point?
Yeah. So let's see. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 iPads out right now. And keep in mind, Apple's changed something. So they just introduced the 10th generation iPad. And the iPad, the kind of the base model, one just called iPad, has been notable for the last quite a few years for being, frankly, the best deal in tech. The 9th generation one cost $329, which is a heck of a deal for what you got from a base level iPad. And so the 10th generation comes out and it's $449, remembering my numbers right. And so, and it's, it's got some new features, no question, great stuff. New industrial designs, using the squared off design of the iPad Air, and it's got the cameras on the landscape side, which is pretty neat. So finally you're not looking off to the side to do your video conferencing and everything. But wow, $30, $120 more for an iPad. That's kind of a lot when the previous one was only $329. And so what Apple did was they kept the 9th generation iPad in the lineup. So it's a little bit like the iPhones, where you can still buy an iPhone 13 or actually an iPhone 12 right now. And so that's how Apple's getting a little bit more of that low end price point, because, hey, 9th generation iPad, until a month ago was a great device, and no one was unhappy about it existing. So, they kept it around, even though it was nominally replaced by the 10th generation. But then, so you got the 9th and the 10th, that's two. And we've got the iPad mini, which hasn't changed, and is a kind of cool little device. I mean, if what you do mostly is like read on the iPad, or, browse the web, things like that, iPad mini is a pretty neat little device. It's a little bit more expensive than the plain iPad now. I think it's $599, $499, can't remember, $499. And then you get to the iPad Air, which is kind of like the 10th generation iPad, but faster. And as Chuck referenced, that's where the Apple Pencil switches. So the Apple Pencil first generation works with the plain iPad, and the 2nd generation Apple Pencil, which is the magnetic one that attaches on the side and charges there as well, that works with the iPad mini and the iPad Air, and then the 2 iPad Pro models. And so the iPad Pro models, they bounce up in price even more. The iPad Air is $599, and then I think it's $799 for the 11-inch, and I'm blanking on the 12.9, $999 for the base one of that. So you get this incredible range from $329 to $999 on the other end,
or $2,500 if you max out the 12.
Well, yeah, right. I was gonna say, that's the other thing is that all of those prices are starting prices. You can pay a whole bunch more if you get a keyboard. There's like 5 keyboards now. Get an Apple Pencil, that's an extra $100 for the first generation, or $129, I think, for the 2nd generation. So you can add it up quite a lot, particularly as you get more storage, you add cellular, et cetera, et cetera. So it makes sense. I mean, it looks messy when you're like, oh my God, there's all these different iPads. But if you actually sit down and stare carefully at it, yeah, if you're trying to pay as little money as possible, you get the 9th generation. If you just want the base model, but you're looking for the kind of the latest and greatest at that, within that lower end price range, the 10th generation. The iPad minis for people who like it small. The iPad Airs for people who are like, oh, I want more than the iPad, but oh my gosh, that iPad Pro is crazy expensive. And then the iPad Pros are there for people who, I think they're finally named right. Like if you're actually a professional who does work on your iPad, you'll ante up the big bucks for them. And I can't recommend that anyone else do it. I mean, my iPad here,
I'm leaning on the chair. I couldn't.
My iPad here is an iPad Pro at 10.5. And back when I got it, it was just like the better iPad. But now the iPad Pros, really don't buy them unless you have a business reason for them. There's just no reason to spend the money. The iPad Air will do everything you need. And
especially since the iPad Air is also an M1. It's the same chip in all the other computers.
Right. It's the same processor. And I was just in Rochester on the weekend in Fairport running a cross country race. And so we stopped in at the Apple Eastview store on the way home, which I had never been to before, but I haven't been to an Apple store in 3 or 4 years, right? COVID, I live in Ithaca. There isn't an Apple store. Syracuse is our closest one. Don't go to Syracuse very often either. And so it was really interesting to actually lay my hands on all the iPads. And, one of the things that I hadn't actually really touched a 12.9 one before. They're huge. I mean, they are not the sort of thing you're going to walk around in your hand. I mean, they probably are great if you have got one of the keyboards. The keyboards for the iPad Pro, a lot of them sort of almost turn it into a laptop, and I could see using it like that. But wow, it's not something you just hold in your hand and sit in your lap. It actually really felt kind of awkward. And similarly, that the Mac Mini or the iPad Mini, the iPad Mini. I'd always thought that it was a little bit awkwardly sized, compared to like, you have the iPhone Pro Maxes, which are pretty big, and then you've got the iPad, and it's sort of in between those two. But when you actually hold it, wow, it's a nice little device. It has to be the right thing. Probably not going to watch video on it as much as you might on a bigger one, but it was a nice form factor. So even though the iPad lineup does look a little messy, I think it actually makes, pretty good sense right now from the consumer standpoint. Less so from the tech journalist of, Apple's got all these weird models and look, they've got funny things like the 10th generation iPad is only compatible with the first generation Apple Pencil, even though the first generation Apple Pencil, which I have one here, it pairs and charges via Lightning, via this little port on the back of it. But the 10th generation iPad doesn't support Lightning. It has USB-C. So you've got to get a little $9 dongle to be able to pair your Apple Pencil and charge it, which is weird.
And there was a story that the Apple stores were out of those dongles, so they stopped selling 10th gen iPads for a while.
Oh, no, I didn't hear that. Yeah. Little known fact, you can actually plug a first generation Apple Pencil into your iPhone to charge it. It won't help you with the pairing, so it's not an overall solution. But I actually charge my pencil from my iPhone most of the time, mostly because my iPad is usually dead, so I have to plug that in to charge it. And then if I want to use the pencil, I have to plug. The pencil's also dead, so I have to plug that into the iPhone, charge them both. I'm not a big iPad user, as you can tell. Any event, I think what I'm guessing, it feels weird to have this, the new iPad with the old Apple Pencil. What I'm guessing is that Apple had to put the camera on that edge, so because it's got the new landscape-based camera, and I'm guessing that precludes putting in the charging hardware and the magnetic stuff for the Apple Pencil 2. So it's one of those situations where it may just not have been possible to do that in an economical way, and Apple doesn't want to, they don't want to raise the cost of the iPad even more. So that's probably the rationale there.
One of our guys also had the thought that if you're upgrading from an older iPad and already have a Pencil 1, the 10th gen iPad costs more already, and to add another $129 for a Pencil 2 was too much.
Yeah. I agree with that as well. And I also think, quick show of hands, how many people here have iPads with pencils?
I have a pencil. I never use it.
Yeah. See, I'm guessing that the pencil, cool as it is, I personally think it's quite cool. I think most people don't use it. Even people who buy them don't use them most of the time. And so I bet that Apple has market research on this, and they basically said that, it's not worth putting the effort into making the pencil a first-class experience on the iPad, because that's not the people who buy it. That if you're going to buy one of the other devices if you're a heavy pencil user. So, and as I said, it's a great little device. I use it a couple of times a year for a very specific thing, is that every now and then I need to do trail maps. And so I'll take a screenshot of a trail, like a topo map, and then I will literally draw the map onto it with the pencil. Brilliant for that. But it's like a couple times a year I got to do this. This is not exactly something I would buy for today. Just so happens that I have. So I think it's an interesting move that Apple's made with that. I did want to comment briefly about the keyboards, because again, I stopped in the Apple Eastview store and got to see all the keyboards. They're weird. Like a lot of these iPad keyboards, they're strange devices. Most of them pretty much like fold and kind of collapse around the iPad to protect it, but not in a very nice way. That it's more like for putting in your bag rather than keeping it on all the time. So this 10th gen or the 10.5 inch iPad Pro, I had the Smart keyboard, And that one was really nice because it kind of flipped and folded and everything such that you could have it protecting the screen, or you could flip it into, having it be acting like a laptop and, a little, the screen up and the keyboard in front. But it was always very flexible and a nice feeling cover, and the keys were never exposed when you weren't using them. Whereas these other ones, you can flip the keyboards to the back or whatnot, but you're always like touching the keys on the back, which feels weird. And they're often quite a bit heavier duty than the old smart keyboard. So I was surprised, when you actually sit down and touch all the different keyboards, which are, you have to pick the keyboard for the iPad very specifically. There's not a lot of choice in between. It was an interesting experience, and I think if you ever are interested in a keyboard for an iPad, you should definitely try it before buying it.
This edition of MacVoices is supported by RocketMoney. Cancel unnecessary subscriptions with RocketMoney at RocketMoney.com. Do you know how much your subscriptions really cost? Most Americans think they spend around $80 a month in subscriptions, while the actual total is closer to $200. That's right, you could be wasting hundreds of dollars each month on subscriptions that you don't even know about or have forgotten about. There's a way to take care of that. It's called RocketMoney, formerly known as Truebill. RocketMoney shows you all your subscriptions in one place and cancels what you don't want for you. RocketMoney can even find subscriptions you didn't know you were paying for. You may even find out you've been double charged for a subscription. To cancel a subscription, all you do is press cancel, and RocketMoney takes care of the rest. Get rid of your useless subscriptions with RocketMoney now. Go to rocketmoney.com/MacVoices. Seriously, it could save you hundreds per year. That's rocketmoney.com/MacVoices. rocketmoney.com/MacVoices. Thanks to RocketMoney for supporting this week's MacVoices. So, how about a show of hands here? I'm going to give you two choices. How many of you use the iPad? And you can raise your hand to both. How many of you use the iPad for creating, or I'll term it production, that you do something that, is production oriented? Wow. Okay. How many of you would how many of you would consider a device that you consume, whether it's video or games or whatever, on?
Yeah.
Okay. What do the rest of you do with it? I mean, this is something I've been struggling with for a while, and Adam, I'm curious to see where you stand on it right now.
I think it's an internet device. It's a browser. That's what most people use it for, I think.
Yeah,
okay,
that's strong on the consumption side.
Yeah, that'd be consumption. Because I for a while, and it seems like it comes and goes, but with the M1 being put into the iPads, it seems like it's come back again, where we're seeing people claiming they're trying to replace their laptops with iPads. And they seem really upset that they can't do it. And that seems to lead to why some folks want Mac OS on an iPad. And it's like, well, you know what? Look, I've got an iPad Pro. I have a keyboard with it that includes a trackpad. And so it might as well be a laptop. It's a little more convenient laptop, maybe, for me to go and grab dinner and prop it up and scroll through some news than it would be for my normal laptop. But it's still, it's
not a lot.
And I don't know that I don't know that it being only a consumption device is a bad thing, but there are a lot of people that seem to feel like it is.
So, this is an M1 MacBook Air, and this is a brilliant device. You want to talk about performance. I've had it since it came out, and the M2. Tanya has the M2, and that's even better. They're just great. And the fact is that they're not quite as convenient for sitting on a chair and reading or something like that. That's where an iPad or an iPhone is really better. But yeah, I feel that the whole production thing is very, very specific to fields or professions or tasks where there's some app which is just great. And I don't even know what they are because they're often really, really specific.
We get that question a lot in our store too about iPad versus laptop, especially when the prices start coinciding. And
Yeah, right.
and almost the bottom line is, do you want a touch screen or do you not?
Well, and and again, it's a little bit of like, because I tried, this is back when 4 or 5 years ago, like when I got this iPad Pro, there was that question again of like, can you replace a laptop? And so that was why I got the keyboard and the pencil and everything like that. And no, I couldn't. It was simply never as good as a MacBook Air for me at the kinds of things I do, which is writing, editing, managing websites in essence. So a lot of copying of data around, moving images into and out of documents, that kind of stuff. It just never competed, and it still doesn't. So and
that's kind of what Stage Manager is supposed to help.
Yeah, and that's a whole world of hurt from what I can tell. I can't use it yet. I have used it on the MacBook Air here, and there's some things about it that I like. I haven't really quite wrapped my head around it all. Like it makes it hard to get to the desktop sometimes, and so I'm a fairly heavy desktop user on the Mac, and so that's the one thing I'm not liking there. But yeah, no, I think Stage Managers, that's part of the reason why Apple came up with it, is it's a little bit hard to manage all this, multiple, working with multiple apps and multiple stuff, multiple bits of things at the same time. But it feels to me like the apps aren't there yet. It's either you've got a specific app that does exactly what you want, or you're out of luck. You just, the browsers are never quite as good. Web apps never work quite as well. That kind of thing.
Well, and I don't want to fall into the trap of having Apple devices viewed as only graphics machines for graphics people, but that the Apple Pencil has, I know several people, it sort of changed their lives because they are graphically oriented, and then what they want to do with it is more in line of what 5 years ago, well, maybe a little more than 5 years ago, would have been, the purview of a graphics tablet connected to your
Wacom's.
Yeah. So, and that's not a bad thing necessarily, but sort of to the point that was made, do you want a touch screen or not? It's also, do you want a pencil capability or not?
Right.
And the ability to draw on it. And so, that's one more differentiation.
And Apple ran all those commercials about what's a computer. Pushing the iPad, But then what I also see too, when people bring Windows PCs in, that a lot of ordinary Windows laptops now have touchscreens, and I accidentally touch it all the time when I don't mean to. Just like on your regular computer, you accidentally touch it all the time because you're used to touching your iPad, and it doesn't seem very useful on the things I do with a computer to have a touchscreen. But the things I do with the iPad, the touchscreen it works a lot better.
Yeah. One thing I think we should note that Apple's actually been really clear about how no, the Mac isn't going away, the Mac isn't turning into iOS, and no, the iPad isn't turning into the Mac. They are different, and Apple is more than happy to have you buy both or not. Apple's not getting hurt here either. Which no matter what your opinions are. Either you're going to buy a great laptop or you're going to buy a great iPad, or you're going to get both at some level or another. So I think it's just that, to my mind, the iPad has never quite found the problem. It's a solution to a problem that's not quite clear, or it's maybe the problem is not quite mainstream enough. So the iPhone, everyone understands the iPhone. You know exactly what you're going to do with an iPhone. You're going to carry it around in your pocket, and it's going to be, your every little thing, even if you don't hardly ever use the phone calls. And whereas with the iPad, you have to think of something a little bit more. You don't just have one because. And so I think that's what's hampered it from taking over as in the way that the iPhone has done. It's not a necessity in the same way. And for most of us, obviously, a Mac is also a necessity. That's where you actually get your work done. Yeah, because we are used to keyboards and mice and all of that big screen.
We frequently call the iPad the living room computer In the living room, on the couch, catching up with email while you're watching TV, looking on IMDb. I can't watch anything without IMDb open. that would be a lot harder with a full laptop.
Yeah. No, it's
and maybe that's where it fits. Maybe it is the perfect second screen for everything but significant computing. And I realize there are exceptions to that, but for the general public kind of people, and I'm not even sure that this group fits in the general public, because you're here as part of an Apple user group. So maybe for the folks out there that own iPads but that don't care enough about it to be enthusiastic like this group is, it may be the perfect, and that may be sufficient.
And now the iPad can be a literal second screen for your computer.
Yeah. Good point.
But at the same time, I think it is also interesting when you look at Apple's financials. The iPad is the product segment that has had the most trouble. It's obviously not doing badly. Apple's still selling boatloads of them, but it's actually Apple does not sell more of them every quarter. Sometimes they go down significantly. And so, it's an interesting, when you look at that compared to the iPhone or the Mac or whatnot, which, in recent years have just like continually climbed. The iPad goes up and down, up and down. And so I think that is some of that, does come, you do hit that with the ambivalence of like, I'm not quite sure what to do with this. And so when they are in awkward spaces with the actual lineup, one of the things that also is weird about the lineup is they release different ones at different times. So like the iPad Air and the 11-inch Pro are constantly like flipping which one is better in terms of, current chips, current, speeds, things like that. So it's not always quite as obvious what to get.
Adam, do you think the up and down is, I've always attributed not as much to what do people do with it as to what new capabilities, what differentiates the older iPad, the last generation or the last model from the new generation or, the current model. And some of those, sometimes those differentiations haven't been, frankly, all that significant.
Yeah. There may be some of that. There's no question. I think it is one of those situations where we're probably a little bit more likely to upgrade our iPhones more regularly because for many of us, they tend to be more essential. Whereas your iPad, you're like, yeah, I can get away with the old one. I'll wait until either it dies or I feel like the new one is compelling. And so, again, Apple actually in some ways doesn't care. Apple is a big enough company. They're willing to wait until you're going to come back and buy the next iPad. But it is, I think it is still telling that it doesn't have that same kind of smooth growth pattern that we see in the other products in quite the same way. So yeah, it may be just, again, a little bit less, I don't know, essential isn't quite the right term, but you're not always going, well, I have to have the latest iPad because otherwise, things won't work.
So since we have pretty readily available trackpads and or mice for the iPad, how do you feel about, should there be a version of macOS for the iPad?
No, it in some sense, what does that get you? Unless you're going, because the problem is that iPad OS, which I'm still a little annoyed at, that Apple sort of split it out into a different name because it's still basically the same thing, and now I have to write about it as an iOS and iPad OS at all times. It really is a different design, and so if you put Mac OS on an iPad, would it just be the same as a MacBook Air at that point? And what does that actually get you if you can't use it as a touchscreen as well? But macOS is not designed to be used for a touch. And so a great deal of stuff wouldn't work the way you want it to, or would be really problematic. And so I think that it's neither fish nor fowl to do that kind of thing, that it's better to keep each one of them doing what they want, what they are designed to do. And I think you'd find yourself annoyed by all the limitations when you suddenly went, well, this iPad is not exactly as good as a Mac running Mac OS.
And I happen to agree with you, but I'm still intrigued by the people that just scream, I want Mac OS on my iPad. And, but when you ask them why, it's just, well, it'll work like a Mac then. It's like, well, then just buy a laptop. You know, what are you doing?
They want a pony too, so.
Or a Mac.
You can want a lot of things for not very good reasons. So yeah, whatever.
Can you just screen share into your Mac from your iPad?
Can you screen share?
Yeah,
from your iPad?
that's
maybe. Okay, there's your solution.
So just to be clear, my iPad is this big. Yeah. I've got two 27-inch monitors on my Mac. I mean, being able to kind of look at my Mac through this little window. Yeah, no, as I said.
No.
Rick, are you muted? Rick, you were muted. You were muted.
Oh,
but it was fun watching you nonetheless.
That's the answer for those people who say that they want Mac OS on their iPad.
Yeah.
That's the workaround. That's all I'm saying.
Right.
That's a fair point.
Yep. Yeah. And they can see how well it'll work.
Yeah. And then we can say, we told you so.
What were you thinking? It's not, and it's like, again, every time I go on vacation or something like that, and do I need to bring the laptop or can I just bring an iPad? Well, I don't usually need to log into my servers via terminal, but if some certain kinds of things go wrong, I do. And do I want to take the chance that that's not going to happen? Because getting a terminal app that actually works decently on an iPad. Well, maybe there's one now, but the last one I tried just stopped working and blah blah blah. Didn't work all that well even before. Like you would think this wouldn't be tough, but getting a decent terminal app for the iPad, not non-trivial. Again, maybe there's a new one, but last one I got went away. So it just different strokes, and what you do if you're don't get me wrong, I love the iPad for watching video on an airplane, or when I'm sick in bed. Just brilliant little device for that. But that's it's not changing my world otherwise.
So before we go into another subject, I want to open it up to questions or comments. I mean, what things are on your minds for the larger world of Apple? Anything? Because I've got plenty of stuff to talk to Adam about. But
yeah, you're gonna be with another Twitter thing, I'm sure.
I'm going to not live that down for a while, I'm afraid. What all are you seeing happening in the Apple world that you think is interesting, exciting, concerning, that you want to know more about? Confusing? Yeah, there you go.
I just see a lot of the antitrust stuff that's going on with Apple across the world, actually. I find it very interesting, and what each country has their own idea of what anti-competitiveness is and things like that. So, and the EU is just going to be starting USB-C is mandatory.
Yep.
Does that limit innovation?
No, it doesn't. I mean, the USB-C thing in the EU is fascinating because, like, if you read the announcement from the EU, they're really clear about how, why they're doing it, and the fact that it doesn't preclude new stuff from coming. And in the, sort of in the general space, and they are actually pushing hard on wireless, charging. So, in this, I can see why they did it, because they tried for a long time to get the industry to standardize on its own, and it didn't.
So previously it was what was Mini B, I think, was the standard, and Apple got Apple got around that because by putting a B Mini or Micro. That was the problem. Is it Mini or Micro? And then there was a Super B. So the Apple put an adapter in the iPhone box.
Yeah,
So the iPhone
yeah.
was still Lightning, but had the adapter.
Yeah, and so right. I mean, the USB is a perfect example of like there were 17 varieties, and they're all completely incomprehensible. USB-C has its own issues. We've been writing about that a bunch, but at least it's one connector, and it's a pretty decent connector. It's not the best connector ever, but it's pretty decent, and it doesn't preclude things like MagSafe. So MagSafe, as long as all those MagSafe laptops can also charge via USB-C. So I find that Lightning. The big problem with Lightning, it's actually a really good little connector. It's bidirectional, pretty stable, pretty durable, et cetera, et cetera. The big problem with Lightning is it's slow, doesn't carry a lot of data, and so if you're going to be just charging, that's okay. And but I think as soon as you want to move any data of any amount, that's when Lightning really starts to fall apart. So
well, isn't the story that Apple wanted to use USB-C, but it wasn't ready yet, so they did Lightning?
Yeah, that may well have been.
Why they call it Lightning if it's not lightning fast? Damn it!
It was at the time.
It was at the time. Exactly. It's like
and
FireWire was.
Thunderbolt, so I assume it was related to Thunderbolt too.
Yeah, I mean, we've had Thunderbolt, we've had FireWire, we have had Lightning, and they were all fast at the time.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
time moves
well,
on.
and Thunderbolt 4, and using the USB-C connector. I mean, Apple was the Thunderbolt people at Apple were very into the concept of like, yeah, let's standardize in this one connector, because the original Thunderbolt 1 and 2 was different. Thunderbolt 3 Thunderbolt 3 gets to be USB. Yeah, Thunderbolt 3 gets to be the USB-C connector, and so so it's sort of nice to move on from an unusual Thunderbolt connector to something else. Of course, that we discover that you have to be careful what you wish for, because then you have 17 cables that all look like they've got the same connector, but we don't know what it is. And they've got random little, glyphs on the side. You have to be able to read them. And
a Thunderbolt cable has a lightning bolt on it.
Yeah.
And a lightning bolt cable does not.
I never thought of that before, but you're absolutely right. Because of course Thunder doesn't look like anything. So,
yeah. But is it a Thunderbolt 3 or 4 or 2?
Yeah. Yeah,
so.
Glenn Fleischman has done a couple of articles for Tidbits that help clarify that kind of stuff, because it's insane. I mean, just the variability involved. But you run into is like all this stuff has to move forward, and part of what the US, what the EU is doing is by saying, hey, this one connector, this is a connector that can do a lot of stuff and is moving forward pretty well. Then we've got 80 gigabit per second USB-C coming out, USB 4. And still using that same connector. So, and I will admit, boy, when you collect enough of these things, and you got different gear of different ages. Oh boy, you got a lot of cables around, and you're trying to keep track of them, and like, do I have one that does this? And you start traveling, like, oh crumb, I forgot to bring the new cable, and blah blah blah. So yeah, there is a certain appreciation for this being a problem.
I've got in my basement, I'm sure you all have seen them, for lack of a better term, the Tupperware like drawers,
yes.
storage.
Yeah, the big plastic boxes.
Yeah. That just have drawers in and out, and I just labeled mini, USB micro, USB-A. Because I've got so
Adam's got racks and racks of them.
Yeah. Okay, Adam's taking a different approach, but there you go.
I use these cardboard boxes, and then I just have bags. I'm like, there's dock connectors.
I use shoe boxes and plastic bags. Label them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
it's crazy.
I was at a customer the other day who had a 30-inch monitor and a 27-inch iMac, and he was trying to plug them in, and of course they have different connectors. And so I'm okay. Do you have a mini DisplayPort to dual link DVI? And he rummages through 100 boxes and pulled one out. Oh my God, it works!
Yeah. You have to.
Yeah, that's video adapters.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So no, it's
great.
crazy. And every now and then I'll still find a cable that I don't know what it is. I'm like, couldn't tell you. Like, I don't recognize these connectors. I'm really not. And there was probably, like something that I don't know, a device I got for review 15 years ago that had a custom cable for some reason. But again, I don't remember this, but somehow the cable stuck around. And so I have no idea. But yeah, at some point I had to go through and just put all this stuff in these labeled bags because I had no idea. And now I can at least know which bag to go rummage around.
You've got
it is
devices
nice
with
to be
no
able
bricks and bricks with no devices.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get rid of these things too, because you paid so much money for them that some of them are $50 to $100.
Yeah.
Well, sure, but
true.
But you need. I mean, I think I've gotten rid of all my SCSI cables. So
they're downstairs. I still have mine.
I still have mine.
We had a customer bring in a bunch of 800K floppy disks and want to get the data off of them.
Whoa.
We were able to find an old Performa that still would read 800K disks.
Wow.
Yeah.
But then he wanted to know how he could do it himself. Buy an old Performa.
Yeah, right. You can't go away.
Yeah.
And I mean, it is interesting. Someone was complaining about the whole USB-C thing, and like, why is this better than all the different ports we had? Blah blah blah. And I was like, you do remember that we used to have ADB and Serial and SCSI, and we complained then too. But you don't hear people like pining for their FireWire and their SCSI and their all that. Those have just gone away, and we've all moved on, and that will happen with USB-C and Thunderbolt as well. Everything will standardize on those soon enough. It's going to be a little bit, but I think USB-A is probably on the way out because everyone wants to just get rid of it. It's going to take a while because that's so common. But
so you think it'll just be a brain port now? Is that the new standard?
Most of it's going to go wireless, honestly. And I mean, I'm not a big fan of wireless charging. And part of it is like, cases often are not compatible with wireless charging on the devices we have. And just from a pure kind of efficiency environmental standpoint, it's very inefficient. So it wastes a lot of power in turning it into heat. And I just think we don't need to create more ways to waste power at this point in time. So I stick with wired charging for now.
So Adam, one thing I wanted to touch on, if by my calendar, if I've got this right, we're nearing the end of Apple's M1 transition, but we still don't have
one more machine.
One more machine, but by the timing, I think roughly the end of this year was supposed to be it, and we don't have a Mac Pro, an M1 Mac Pro, or an M2 Mac Pro, or an M Mac Pro. Now, listen, the other thing too, there was this little thing called the pandemic that disrupted a whole lot of things. So, is it realistic to expect Apple to still meet that timeline? And I know a lot of people are hot for it, and I might be one of them, depending on what it looks like. But is it realistic to ding Apple for not meeting their original projection?
It's a little hard for me to stress too much about that, given the release of the Mac Studio. I mean, the Mac Studio with an M1 Ultra. At that point, what are you talking? Like, what more do you need from a Mac Pro? And expandability, more memory, things like, sort of memory kind of expandability. But it's a little bit hard to say that is not the machine, that machine is not going to serve the needs of most professionals. Yes, the full on, you can slam drives into it and, it's a big expandable device. There's some use for that. And, Apple has not discontinued it, which says to me that they're still planning on bringing a new one out that does that. But it used to be that the Mac Pro is what you needed for performance. And that just doesn't seem to be the case anymore. So
I'm almost still waiting for a 27-inch iMac
Yeah, you and the rest of the world.
Yeah, a Mac Mini and the 27-inch monitor is, or a Mac Studio and the 27-inch monitor. You're looking at $3,000, where the old 27-inch used to be 1,600.
Yep, absolutely. And so, I everything I've heard is that there's the 27-inch is gone, and I'm very, very sad about that.
The 27-inch monitor is almost a computer already with that A12 in it, A13.
Well, and I was, again, I hadn't actually seen a 24-inch iMac in person since those came out. They came out in April 2021. So again, when I was at the Eastview store, like, wow, those are pretty nice little machines. And that 4.5-inch or 4.5K Retina display. It's 24 inches diagonal, so it's a little bit smaller than the 27-inch physically. And its default working resolution is a little bit smaller. I actually measured 320 and 100, one pixels smaller in one dimension and 180 in the other. But you can actually just switch its resolution to be the same as a 27-inch iMac, and it was fine. I was put it this way: I had previously thought the 24-inch iMac was a low-end home machine, and after seeing it in person, I think it would be a totally fine machine for a whole lot of professional uses. It's the M1, and they're certainly going to update it to M2, or maybe give it a faster, the M1 Pro kind of, that kind of upgrade chip on the chip side. But the fact is that it still meets that. It starts at $12.99. I mean, it's super cheap for that kind of monitor. It's exactly the same thing as the 27-inch iMac always had. So yeah, it's just hard to beat that combination when you build the monitor in, even though, then people complain about the fact that, well, yeah, your computer's old and your monitor would still be good. I'm sitting here looking at this 27-inch iMac, and I cannot use it as a monitor, and I've tried every little tricky thing in the book in terms of, what was it? Luna display and, this and that and the other thing, to be able to use two 27-inch iMacs. I actually, you can kind of see it here. This one on the floor here is a 2014 27-inch iMac, my previous one. And I'm keeping it around. It's still a great machine, great little monitor, but it's 2014. So, it's a little bit slower and than a new one. So it's going to be interesting to see if Apple ever comes out with something like that. But I just haven't heard anything that would indicate that they are.
Am I wrong about the M1 iMacs though? Can't you plug a second monitor into that? I mean, isn't that a built-in feature?
Yeah, but only one monitor. You can't do two.
Only one, and you only really need one. But the real problem is that it's not a huge problem, but we don't have a matching monitor. So I mean, Apple's never been good about this, but at least what I'm using here is a 27-inch iMac with a 27-inch Thunderbolt display, and they have the same screen size. They sit perfectly together. They look nice together. It's an elegant combination. Whereas you start getting into the random third-party 4K displays, and they're just not going to fit with the 24-inch iMac in terms of industrial design and getting them to sit nicely on a desk together and be the same height. Because you want them to be at exactly the same level. You don't want to have the physical stair step even if the desktop is the same. So that kind of attention to detail is what I expect from Apple, and I don't get from anyone else.
And that's where the Mac Mini can do 2 monitors, and the Mac Studio can do 4.
Yeah.
So you can move up.
Or the 16-inch and 14-inch MacBook Pro can also do 2 externals. So one possibility. But then the problem is the Studio display is stupid expensive. So, it's a good monitor. So again, looking at it in person, my opinion about the Studio display was, yeah, it's fine. It looks just like my 27-inch iMac. It's a great monitor, but it's either $1,600 or $2,000 depending if you get the tilt and height adjustable stand, and that's really too expensive compared to what we were paying for a 27-inch iMac just a year ago. So yeah, I'm frustrated in that particular way. I think that Apple has not quite given the attention to detail that we want. But again, 2 monitors is still feels unusual, even though it's such a productivity boost.
And I want to make sure I point out, though, that there are solutions out there that will let you plug in to
Display
even
link.
Display Link. And I mean, I think Pluggable just released one yesterday that apparently you can plug 4 monitors into an M1 Mac. So
and that's all Display Link technology, I think, right? This the pluggable one.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Yeah, I haven't used a Display Link technology connection recently, so I don't know how it compares. Long ago, it was one of those cases. It was impressive that the bear could dance, but it wasn't exactly Swan Lake.
Do any of these considerations give a boost to a refurbished market for some of these things that aren't sold by Apple anymore, but you long for?
Not really, and unfortunately, the reason is simply that you really do need to kind of move forward. So, for instance, I'm using this 27-inch Thunderbolt display over here. No, I'm outside, but it's not Retina. So, and let me tell you, it's obvious. Like the Retina iMac, that's a crystal clear, text is brilliant, kind of monitor, and then the one over here, it's kind of fuzzy.
Uh-huh.
And that was a great monitor in its time, but I don't know how old that is, like 10 years, 15 years? I mean, I really don't know. I can't remember when it came out, but it's such an old screen. And so that's what you really don't want to, when you get into the refurbished stuff, there's certain things that are better, but you realize how far we've come in terms of improvements. And I think monitors are Apple tried and failed to get 5K to be a thing. So when the 5K Retina iMac came out, there were like 8 or 10 third-party 5K monitors, and they have all gone away except for one. And Apple, I believe, is basically keeping that one around, the LG 5K Ultra Fine, I think it is, it's called. And that is the only 5K display left on the market that they were not successful, and Apple failed. So now we're left with the 4K displays, which, they're okay. I mean, they're not terrible, but they just don't compete with the 5K when you sit them next to each other. You're like, oh yeah, I want that one.
But they're relatively cheap by comparison.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The 4K displays are super cheap comparison. But you get what you pay for, right? That's the thing is that when you're sitting and looking at this thing, all day, every day. That's when, that's when I say, I'm willing to pay a little bit more. I not pay $2,000 for just the monitor. But I have paid some money for monitors in the past, and I will probably do so again before I die. So,
but yeah, LG's 5K monitor is 1,300, so it's not that far off of Apple's, and it doesn't have speakers, and it doesn't have the camera, and all the extra stuff that the Apple one gives you.
And it's probably better now, but for a while it had some real reliability issues.
Didn't it had a weird issue with EM killing your airport if your router was too close to your monitor?
Yeah, they had to wrap it in tinfoil.
Yeah.
Tinfoil hats did wonders for it.
And it's not even a CRT. You can see that maybe with a CRT.
Well, just remember all those old monitors that used to be mono green. To look at. So anytime you think your 4K isn't, good enough, look at one of those.
Amber, man, go Amber.
Yeah. But I don't want to be argumentative about it, but I will point out
that you do.
Well, okay, sometimes I do. But Adam, I agree with you completely. If you said a 4K beside a 5K, no question. But
you're arguing really well when you agree with me completely. Glad you're doing well. Keep it up.
But from a practical standpoint, to me, it's like going to Best Buy and looking at the super high priced TVs, and man, they look gorgeous, but I can't afford it. So I bring home a TCL, and nothing wrong with TCL, but they're not the Sony with the 5,000 shades of black or whatever. And I sit it down in my living room, and it's like it looks gorgeous, and I saved a bunch of money. And so, now behind me are two 4K 27 inches, and, they're fine. I mean, I use them every day for work, and I don't have an issue. Now, if I had a 5K to sit over there beside it, it probably would bug me. But since I don't really notice it.
So you're saying ignorance is bliss, and we need to make sure we're ignorant.
No, I didn't say that. Come on now.
Won't you get
La,
an
la, la, la,
4K is fine. You'll never notice.
I told you he was running for office. That sounds exactly like the way a politician would twist things.
As your eyes get older, you're not going to notice this much at all.
You can't see anything
I
anyway.
was going to say.
Oh, man. Okay, I'm sorry I brought that example up. Just got roasted.
It's true, and I guess what it really, really is a case of Apple spoiled us, is what it comes down to. That when that 2014 Retina iMac came out, the first 27-inch one, I remember I was going to. It came out in October, November, sometime around in there, and like a couple of weeks later, we went out to Los Angeles for the Mac Tech conference. And that was my chance to go see one in person at an Apple store there. We went to the Apple store in Santa Monica with Michael Cohen, who we work with. And it was basically, I looked at it and I was like, yes, I'm buying that. And soon as, actually I ordered it before, like that night, so it would be that, have a chance of getting it by the time we got home. And, there has not been, so literally every day since 2014, that is what I have looked at, is this 27-inch 5K display. And so, yeah, I'm spoiled is what it comes down to. And you're right, Chuck, that if I had never seen a 27-inch 5K display of that quality, I would think that the 4K ones are pretty neat.
Yeah. And I wanted to
damn you, Apple.
Yeah. Well, and I want to acknowledge what you said, though, because if you don't have multiple monitors, 4K or otherwise, make sure you do your best to get at least one more, because it does make a huge difference in productivity to be able to have multiple things open at once and see them. It was long been my contention that we would never achieve the paperless office until our screens were the size of our desks. And now we're pretty much there if you want to be.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, you never quite know. The obvious reasons are, you can, have a web browser window open about something you're writing about. Like I do this absolutely all the time, or, your email while you're writing about something. So you can just look back and forth to stuff. But there's even some slightly unusual ones. So for instance, the board meeting I was on before this, I ended up doing all the screen sharing, because screen sharing with Zoom is a whole lot better when you have two monitors, that you could share another screen and still see what people are, the presenter, as you as the printer, the sharer, still see everyone doing. So if people want to raise their hand and ask a question, you're not blind to that. And so it's just a couple of little things here and there. We were just like, oh my God, that's so much easier. So it's a big win.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at the clock and I think we're approaching time. But I want to make sure we take any more questions from you all that you have about anything. Adam's position on key social issues. Anything?
Well, I believe that if we just come together, we can all have multiple monitors. Sorry. Chicken in every pot and two monitors on every desk.
Yeah, next time you're in town, you'll have to stop by my store. We're about 2 miles from the Eastview store.
Oh, you were that close. Oh, okay. Yep. I didn't realize. Yeah, we were at Center Park in Fairport running a race. So,
and that's about 2 miles from my house.
On Sunday, it was stupid hot in Rochester.
Yeah.
75 degrees. Ugly. I wasn't running, but all my team were. So, it's fun. But yeah, no. I will have to do that next time we're in town. We do tend to go that part of the world relatively frequently for these cross country races. So. All right.
Well, run here or drive here. It's cross country, right?
Drive. Yeah. It's a long ways. A little bit of, and all the rest stops on the I-90 are closed these days, which is just annoying. So,
just to let you know, I got 2 drives mounted.
Meanwhile, back to the drives.
Yeah, all right. I reformatted them, and they came back to, on the desktop.
Came back to life.
Well, that's good. I would be. I still run a few tests to make sure that you can back stuff up and launch it from those drives. That still would scare the daylights out of me.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a difference in the way the file system works, starting with 10.15. Even though it's APFS, that back to 10.13 is supposed to read. That we've run into issues where it's the older OSs won't read the drives formatted by a newer OS.
Ooh.
I remember something vaguely about that. Yeah. Huh.
Sometimes it's that hidden data volume that the OS installer creates.
Right.
When it splits your system and your data into two volumes. And then Time Machine is really different on, when did they start that? Was it Big Sur? Where Time Machine is now, instead of being a folder full of folders and sparse images, it's actually volumes in a container. And what's interesting is if you do two computers on a single drive, it makes different volumes in a different container. So it makes it a little confusing to know which drive is which computer.
Yeah, it made sense. It made sense to do the new architecture, but it did cause some confusion here and there. So, all right. Well, I'm getting kind of tired here, and I suspect some of you guys are as well. So we should probably wrap it up.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. This was a lot of fun. It always is.
Oh, thanks for sharing with us.
Thanks for coming. Yeah.
And maybe one of these years
you
we'll
again.
be an in-person meeting again. So
that'd be nice.
We did try an in-person meeting last month and the month before, and we just didn't get the people other than the board coming to it.
People still aren't coming up for meetings.
Well, it's so much nicer to be at home when you don't, and then you don't have to leave somewhere and go home.
Yeah, right.
Well,
And
plus winter coming, it's easier to be home.
Yeah. Especially up where you guys are in the snow belt.
There's no place like home.
Who added that? Have you noticed that in photos, Adam? If you go to location on your photos, somebody added snow belt at Apple.
Really?
Yeah. So when you look at a location of a photo, it will say, Mastodon snow belt or, Rochester snow belt.
Really? Huh.
At least it does on my computer, and I've seen it on a couple of other computers too. And I didn't add that. It's somewhere in whatever location service Apple's using.
Huh. Interesting. I mean, I'm not seeing it, but cool. You never know.
It's frustrating when I see that. I don't want to know about the snow belt.
Yeah, really. Not snowing now. It's not snowing.
Yeah.
Not snowing. All right. Well, good night, everybody.
Thank you all.
Fun. We'll do it
Take
again.
care.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Adam. Thank you, Chuck.
Yep.
Take care.
All right.
All right.
Good night.
Good night.
Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you Mac Voices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.